Yo, book nerds, and happy Monday. I finished finally reading Fairy Tales by Hans Christian Andersen. This is a collection of his short stories, his fairy tales, obviously. There's like 60 some, like 64 or 60 some stories in here, and there's different categories, like there's fairy tales and there's legends, and then there's anthropomorphic stories, and like there's all these different categories for his stories. But overall, I had a good time reading these stories. Hans Christian Andersen was a Danish writer. He lived in the 1800s. I don't remember exactly when, but this is a classic, obviously. But this was translated, and I apologize if I get the translator's name wrong, Marty van Holt. I'm not sure if I'm saying that correctly, so my apologies there. This translator, she has a PhD in Scandinavian languages from the University of Minnesota. Guys, I live in Minnesota if you did not know. And so I just thought that was cool that it says, at least at the time of this, that she was in Minneapolis, Minnesota. So like, I know where that is. Like, this was translated really close to me. So I don't know, little fun fact. But anyway, like I said, the stories were amusing. They were very fun, cute, light, easy. I thought the translation was pretty good. A couple times it felt a little clunky, but you know, that's gonna happen anytime you have a translated work. These stories were not like groundbreaking or the best that I've ever read, but they were fun. I feel like Hans Christian Andersen, his stories would start really strong and I'd be interested, and then oftentimes the endings would kind of fall flat. Sometimes they felt rushed, or they would have a sudden like shift and it'd be kind of abrupt. But overall, like, I still enjoyed myself and I do not regret reading these stories. I thought it was amusing. Like, I feel like Hans liked to write himself into his stories because oftentimes there would be characters named Hans, so that was kind of funny. And I've heard, I don't know how true this is, but I've heard that many of his stories were very based on like things that he was going through, especially like unrequited love. He had a lot of like sadness in his life revolving around loving people who did not love him back. And so he would put those themes and topics into his story. Again, I don't know how true that is. It's just what I've read. I'm not going to go through all 60 some stories, but I will tell you like which ones I enjoyed. I'll also mention some of his more famous ones because I didn't know that he'd written many of these stories, but I've heard of the stories and it was cool to see the original now. So let's just kind of go through a little list that I have of some of the short stories that I enjoyed and some of the famous ones. So there was one called Something, and it was like about these brothers who want to do something with their lives, and there was a writer in there, and I like related to the writer a little bit, and I enjoyed Something. Little Klaus and Big Klaus was also very amusing. It was about a mischievous man and a bad man, and that one was really fun and amusing. The Princess on the Pea, I always thought it was called The Princess and the Pea, but the original is titled The Princess on the Pea, or at least in this translation it is. So I had heard of that story. That's a pretty famous story. It's very short. There was a story called Claude Hans, which I really enjoyed because it reminded me of a play that one of my brothers was in growing up, which was called Wooing Red Riding Hood. Like, it's about Red Riding Hood. But basically, like, there's these people that are trying to woo the princess, and then Claude Hans, he's kind of dumb, and he comes along and he of course wins the princess, like, over all these other smart, accomplished people, which I just thought was funny. And that's very similar to the plot of that play that my brother was in, so it was funny. I also enjoyed What Father Does Is Always Right. That one was quite a spiral of a story, and I enjoyed that. I've thought of like maybe teaching that in my classroom because it's funny. I also enjoyed The Shadow. That one was different. I don't want to tell you guys too much because these are all like super short stories. So if I mention them, like I thought they were good, and go check them out for yourself because they're not very long. Probably his most famous work is The Little Mermaid. I really liked The Little Mermaid. Is probably my favorite story overall. It was a longer one of his stories, but it was worth the read. I flew through it. The ending kind of fell flat, but most of his endings fall flat. It was a little bit weaker, but I still really enjoyed the story. But there's a lot of differences, man, between the original and the Disney movie. Let me tell you. Spoiler alert if you don't want to know. But when the Little Mermaid gets her legs, getting her legs is like being cut in two. It's like very painful and graphic. And when she walks, it feels like she's walking on knives. So like very painful, gruesome kind of idea. And she doesn't just lose her voice. The Sea Witch cuts her tongue out. Like, that's violence. Yeah, cuts her tongue out. Yeah, she also doesn't even get the boy, right? She doesn't get her man. She doesn't get the prince. She goes through all this suffering. She loses everything. She loses her family. She loses her voice. She's going through all this pain. And then she doesn't even get the guy. Like, it's a very sad ending. She turns into sea foam. Like, it's rough. Very tragic, as most original fairy tales seem to be. Another one of Hans Christian Andersen's more famous works, I feel like, is The Emperor's New Clothes. That one was also very amusing. I feel like I'd read it before, but I have no idea when or where I would have read it before. But that one was funny. Thumbelina was very cute, very simple. I used to love that movie when I was a kid. I also really liked The Ice Maiden, not to be confused with The Snow Queen, two different stories. The Snow Queen, this cover art is like based off of that story, it says. So like this is The Snow Queen. But both stories I really liked. I also enjoyed sounds like the wrong word for this story because it's really sad. But I enjoyed The Little Match Girl. I feel like I read a picture book version of this as a kid, which just seems really sad when you think about it. But really good story. Probably one of his strongest, I feel like his strongest stories. Deep themes and just hauntingly beautiful. The Little Match Girl. Definitely recommend. I liked The Bog King's Daughter. That one was interesting. And of course, The Ugly Duckling. That's another one of his more famous works. And I really enjoyed The Spruce Tree. There was some really deep themes in that story about like living life in the moment, being appreciative of what you have while you have it, because life goes really fast and like you're gonna have regrets in life. Like I really liked The Spruce Tree. So anyway, that's like a short list of the ones that I really enjoyed the most out of this collection. Again, there's like 60 some, so there's quite a few to go through. I did enjoy the writing and the translation, though there was some lines that were really good. I just want to share some with you. One of the first stories I read, it was called The Gardener and the Gentry, also a really good one. The way that story ended was just so funny. It ends with, well, that's the story of the gardener and the gentry, and now you can think about it. Like what? Just so like random and funny. Just like, well, there you go. That's the story. Now you can think about it. Like quite a few of his stories ended in similar ways to that. Like, yeah, there's the story, and now you know it. And it's just like kind of humorous. There was another story called The Galoshes of Fortune, which was interesting. And there was a line where like a man had passed away and it was talking about his body and his soul. And the line goes, "But we can take comfort that the soul is most clever when it's on its own. The body only dumbs it down." I don't know, those lines made me really stop and think like, our bodies, like I'm a Christian, so like I believe that I have a soul, and like this idea that our body dumbs down our soul, like it hinders our soul is free once we die. It's an interesting concept to think about. Then in The Ice Maiden, I liked this description of water. Water is so soft and yet so strong. It has a back to bear weight and a mouth with which to swallow. Gently smiling, softness itself and yet a terror with shattering strength. Like water, we need water to survive. Water, I like water. I drink water all the time. But water can also be dangerous. Like we need it, but it can also be a force to be reckoned with. Like I don't know, I liked that description in The Ice Maiden. Then in The Thorny Patch to Glory, there's a line that I also enjoyed. It says, "The fairy tale and reality are not far apart, but the fairy tale has its harmonious conclusion here on earth, while reality often postpones its past earthly life into time and eternity." That just made me stop and think, like, yeah, like if you're like me and you believe in heaven, like you believe that God will judge you when you die, and that happy ending, like everything working out, justice happening, may not happen here on earth. It may happen when you die. But fairy tales tend to, wrap up nicely here on earth, and we can wish for that, but it may not happen. We're not guaranteed anything in life. I don't know. Some of these lines like really made me think. But anyway, I will leave you on that note to think about. Overall, again, I enjoyed this. Stories weren't the best thing I've ever read, but they were fun in their own way. Light, easy. Some were deep and made you think. Some were a little gruesome. Not as gruesome as many of like the Grimm brothers fairy tales, but some still had their gruesome points. But again, really thought this was worth checking out and reading. If you've read any of Hans Christian Andersen's fairy tales, drop down in the comments and we can chat there. That's all I have for you guys today, and I will talk to you next Monday. Hit that like button and subscribe. Thanks for talking books with me.